Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Album Musings. We're on to episode 4. So this week's episode is Grace Jones, Living My Life. So I'll be going through, as I've done in previous episodes, we'll take a look a little bit about the album itself and where it fitted in to the UK charts at the time. We'll also look at a couple of the tracks. There were several singles released off of the album, but they didn't all chart in the UK. So I'll just focus on the ones that charted in the UK, but I will show you all of the singles that were released in a moment when we get there. So let's dive in and have a look at the album. So a bit of a helicopter view. So 6th album, released in 1982, 7th of November. So this video is going to go out on the 16th of November 2022. So, yeah, the album's around about 40 years old now. And this was the last of 3 albums recorded at Compass Point Studios in the Bahamas. So I often think about this as the third of the Compass Point trilogy. But there are some differences, as we'll see in a moment, between this album and the 2 subsequent ones in terms of the makeup of the tracks. So the genres on the album that, that sort of you can tick off if you like, or were combined together: pop, funk, new wave, reggae. I think I've mentioned before in terms of the length of album at this time. Obviously, you're not going to see anything over 40 minutes around there because that was the size for the format that was predominant at that time, which would have been, a vinyl LP. So as it says here, Jones had already recorded 2 new wave reggae oriented albums. You had the most recent one before this, which was Nightclubbing, and that was her most successful record to date. What was interesting about this album, about Living My Life, as opposed to Nightclubbing and the album previous to that, this one had a lot less covers on it. There was only actually one cover that ended up on the album. Now, my understanding is that there were other outtakes which were covers, but they weren't included on the album, and they didn't really surface, I don't think, until this compilation. So commercial success, and we'll see how that fits in alongside Grace Jones's other albums, both prior to this and after. Of course, one thing that it is famous for is the artwork, and that was created by her then partner Jean-Paul Gode, I think that is. I don't know if there's a pronunciation there, not really. Or Goudet. And it was a cutout, so it was cut out from the original photograph. And in terms of the way it was arranged with the white background, it gives the head and face this angular shape. And it has this piece of tape or plaster, whatever you want to call it, pasted over her left eyebrow. If you look really close at the album cover, you can see drops of water or sweat on the face as well. So this is a quick overview of Grace Jones's studio albums, and so you can see where it fits in here. So these three are all recorded at the same studio, and recorded, as we'll see, using what I suppose you might refer to as a house band for the studio. So there were 7 tracks on the album, and it's interesting that, you know, on side 1 you have quite long tracks here. Personnel wise, you can see there was quite a few people involved, both in the production stroke engineering side of things and also played on the albums. So you have engineering assistants, keyboards, production, mixing, guitar. So, and I've mentioned this before when I spoke about Grace Jones on a previous Seeds of Flourishing episode. The two people for me that I tend to think about most when I think about this period in Grace Jones's recording history is Sly Dunbar on drums and Robbie Shakespeare on bass. Awesome rhythm section, and I'll be talking a little bit more about them at the end of the video. Obviously we've spoken about the sleeve design, Grace Jones on vocals, more designers, photographers. We've got some organ on the album, some more percussion. So you can see there's quite a few different people involved, and I imagine quite a number of those were associated directly, at least on the music side, with that particular studio. So here's a quick summary chart wise. Obviously we're looking at Wikipedia data, so this can change, or has the potential to change over time. When we look at the UK chart data, it's going to be a bit more static because we're looking at a particular point in time. Saying that, I don't know if any of these peak positions would ever change, but you never know over time. So you can see highest position 15 in the UK charts, and that's mainly what I'm going to be talking about in this episode, is the position of the album and various tracks in the UK charts. But we can also see where it got on the US charts in terms of the Billboard 200 and then the R&B hip hop albums charts. Certification and sales, again, you have to be a bit careful with these because the certifications are variable around the world. You can see it sold 15,000 units, certified units in New Zealand, and that was enough to make it go platinum in that particular area, that particular region. So if we look critically, often I use Album of the Year for this, and I just consistently use this. There's probably other meta-analysis sites I could use, but I've just decided to settle with this. So in terms of popularity and the charts and the user feedback, the user scores, the critic scores that are used on Album of the Year, you can sort of place it, you can see it here placed alongside the other albums. And again, I'm not surprised to see that, you know, Nightclubbing and Where Warm Leatherette are so high up popularity wise. Then you've got Slave to the Rhythm, which came out after Living My Life. We've got an earlier album here called Portfolio. I'm not quite sure, often when I do this by popularity, I'm not sure what else they're adding into the mix here, because it doesn't quite make sense. And I'm assuming there's some sort of weighting here in terms of the numbers. But I tend to find that with the higher scored stuff, that don't often make sense. As you go down the list, there's a bit of wiggle room here as well, but we can sort of see there certainly what the most popular albums critically are going to be. So let's get on to some actual raw data in the UK charts and have a look from that perspective. So you can see here, if we look at just the peak position over time here from 1980 through to 85, the peak position was just getting better and better until Island Life, which I believe is a compilation album. That was the highest peak position on the UK albums charts. But it's working its way up, and here's Living My Life, number 15. Out of her studio albums, so if we exclude Island Life here, it's had the longest weeks on the chart. And of course, when we're talking about weeks on chart, with the album chart, we're not talking about the top 40 here. We're talking about a wider net, if you like, beyond the top 40. Singles wise, so if we look down here, the two singles that hit the UK charts off the album is this one, which is actually a double A side. This is the second track off the album. So The Apple Stretching, Nipple to the Ball, and Mine a Jamaican Guy here. Now, just to clarify, you can see listed here we've got actually 5 releases. It gets a little muddy because, as we saw in the UK, this was released as a double A side. This was released as a separate single in different territories, and some of the later singles as well were also in certain regions only. So I believe Cry Now, Laugh Later wasn't released at all in the UK. And Unlimited Capacity for Love, I'm not even sure where that was, what region that was released in. So the album itself, we were talking about the run of this album, so 23 weeks in the top 100. So at that point, the album chart, when this came out, and if we look back, we'll see that this was released on the 7th of November 1982, and jumped ahead there. This went straight in at number 15 on the 20th of the 11th 1982, so that shot into the charts. And then it was just a sort of slow retreat back out of the charts. So dropped out in 83. As you can see, it's quite a good run there over the Christmas period, although albeit on the higher areas of the chart. Drops out and then does another 7-week run in the higher regions of the chart. Just scrapes the top 50 here, from the 26th of the 3rd till the 7th of the 5th, 83. And then a very short 3-week run. Again, real top end of the chart. Didn't even scratch the top 75 from May 83 until June. If we look at what else was in the charts at the time when it got to its highest position, which is number 15, you see there's an overlap here from last week. So as A Kiss in the Dream House was coming out, which was the album we spoke about in the last episode, Living My Life shot in. And you'll see here probably a lot of albums I spoke about in the previous episode. So we got Kids from Fame at number 1, Hello I Must Be Going, Phil Collins, Heartbreaker by Dionne Warwick. We've got the Squeeze compilation of singles album on the charts here from the makers of Status Quo. ABBA, the singles, the first 10 years. There's various artists on the charts. So this must be still... this must have been still when they had various artist charts. Various artist albums included. Kids from Fame again. The Rise and Fall of Madness. And so on. So just above Duran Duran's Rio. I'm not sure if this was going back up the charts or this was on its way in. And if we just scroll down, you can see a few greatest hits as well. They just give you some idea that what was going on in the UK charts, album-wise, when that came out. So the first single, Nipple to the Bottle, lead single from the 6th studio album. As I've said, some territories it was a double A side with the apple stretching. Some countries the B side features Cry Now, Laugh Later, or a dub version of My Jamaican Guy. And then all 3 of those tracks would later receive separate single releases. And you can see all the different versions listed down there. So let's have a look and see how well it did on the UK charts. Not great. Got to number 50, so didn't even scratch the top 40 singles charts. It's only on the chart for 4 weeks. And singles wise, what was it alongside? And I think there's going to be again a little bit of overlap between this and last week's episode, just because of the time frame and the fact this album just shot in the charts. So we've got Culture Club, Do You Really Want to Hurt Me, Eddie Grant's I Don't Want to Dance, I can remember that, Mad World, Tears for Fears. Yeah, some Kids from Fame. Obviously Fame was big at that time in the UK. Spandau Ballet, Chicago, Caroline Live at the NEC. Good to see Status Quo still in the charts in 80 when was this? This would have been what, 82, yeah. Maybe they were looking for a Christmas single, eh? Oh, Pass the Duchy by Musical Youth. Ziggy Stardust by Bauhaus. Yeah, I did mention this, I think, previously. Awesome cover. So, we've got to go quite deep down to find the highest position, if you remember. Oh, look, Subdivisions by Rush. Flock of Seagulls. So, yeah, 82, of course, we're talking about a period of when new romantic bands were a thing, or bands that would fall into that category. Obviously, Japan were kicking around way before this. Hopefully at some point I'll get to talk about a Japan album. Just trying to find out, where do we go? 50, it's always number 50. There it is. I missed it. Okay, so this is thought of as the 3rd single because of the fact that in some territories they'd split down the previous 2. So sometimes it was an A-side, a double A-side, and other times it was 2 separate singles. So with this one, My Jamaican Guy, like I said, 3rd single. Came out on January the 14th, 1983. If we look at the release here, so October 82. So this is now getting into January 83. So album's already out now. So let's see how that did. So not as well, even worse, number 56. So again, interesting thing here. We've got, an album that did the best so far on the UK album charts, but we've got singles that possibly weren't doing quite, or hadn't done quite so well as, say, something like Private Life. So yeah, number 56. It's sort of, crept back out again. But I do remember this being a single, so it must have got, at the time, it must have got radio play, even though it didn't even scratch the top 40. Probably a popular song on, daytime radio. So let's have a look and see where it slots in. So Let's Dance by David Bowie was number 1. Got Church of the Poison Mind, Culture Club, Duran Duran, Beat It by Michael Jackson. We're going to be talking about Thriller soon, actually, because we're getting close to that album. Or I'm getting close to covering it because it came out this time of year. Kajagoogoo, wow. Oh, Big Country, another favourite of mine. Blue Monday, New Order. Sweet Dreams by the Eurythmics. So these are all competing singles as U2. Oh, Drop the Partner by Joan Armatrading, wow. Rosanna by Toto. Oh wow, Peter Tosh did a cover of Johnny Be Good. I did not know that. There we go. Number 56. As we're this far down, let's just scroll down and see what were in the lower reaches of the charts. Oh, clearly a novelty single, David Bellamy. Wow. So those are the only two singles I really want to cover, because as I've said, none of the others got anywhere near the UK charts, and there's reasons for that. Some just weren't released in that territory, by the look of things. Most of the others weren't. And just that whole thing with the the different ways they managed that first single and the two tracks that were either on the double A side or separate singles. So I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of my memories, if you like, surrounding Grace Jones and other connections with that. So I think it is important to just focus a little bit on this really important period, like 1980 to 83. So they refer here in the Wikipedia article to this anti-disco sentiment. It's interesting how I experienced that in the UK, because disco artists did still manage to do reasonably well through punk, but what I noticed had changed was really what was being played at nightclubs or discotheques. Through the influx of like the new romantic movement. So there was sort of that going on, after, because we're 1980, we're well after punk. 80 I always associate with the new wave of British heavy metal and bands that had got into the charts then. And now when the album we're talking about is released, we're getting up to 82 now. And as you saw from the sort of stuff that was in the album charts and the singles charts, new romantic bands are in full swing. But in 1980, when this trilogy of albums started to come out. So we got the release of Warm Leatherette, which had, it was pretty much, I think, all covers actually. I don't know if there was one. Is there even? Oh look, look. So there's only one track which has a credit to Grace Jones on it. Oh, okay. That's interesting. There you go. So, extended version of Private Life released as a single with a cover of She's Lost Control, a non-album track on the B-side. So that was Warm Leatherette 1980. 81 we've got Night Clubbing. Again, a whole slew of covers, including the Iggy Pop David Bowie song Night Clubbing. And of course, Compass Point All Stars with the, for want of a better word, the house band. And of course this did particularly well. I remember the promotion for that when she appeared on the Russell Harty show and slapped him on during the interview because she felt she was being ignored. And then we move on to this week's album we've been talking about, which is Living My Life. So we have a flip there where we've only got one cover on it. Although, as I think I pointed out, there were a few tracks which they were recorded, but weren't featured on the album, but then cropped up on this compilation. And as mentioned before, again, we've got this iconic artwork. And then after that, we move on to this interesting period where Grace Jones has this role in Conan the Destroyer of Zula the Amazonian. And also then subsequently in 85, so moving on quite a bit more, she plays Mayday in the 14th James Bond film, A View to a Kill. And then after that, of course, we get up to Slave to the Rhythm, which was the last of her recordings for Ireland, but wasn't part of that trilogy. Be curious to know where that was recorded. It was recorded on, oh, there we go, Trevor Horn was involved. And does it say it was still recorded on Ireland? I'm not too sure where it actually was recorded, but let's look down and see who was involved. Oh crikey, look at that. Pretty much ensemble personnel there. Wow. Yeah, so quite different lineup here of musicians. So that brings us up to 85. Now, if I sort of reflect on how, obviously I was aware of Grace Jones, but then at what point I really became aware of Sly and Robbie as that sort of dynamic rhythm section, and then found out, just how many different things they were involved with. It was actually and I may have mentioned the connection before, but it was as part of me watching with my brothers this series on UK TV called Rock School. I'm not talking about the Gene Simmons thing. This is the original Rock School, nothing like the other one. And it was a series that explored the history of rock music and gave instruction on performance techniques. And it revolved around three people for the episode that I watched, which was series 1. There was a series 2, which I don't think I watched, which was Deirdre Cartwright, Henry Thomas, Jeff Nichols. What was cool about this was they had guest demonstrators that they'd interviewed on as well. And it was just really cool. It was a lot of people I recognised, a lot of people I didn't necessarily know that well. The volume listing on here is a bit confusing because it was broken down slightly differently in the UK. They were 25 minutes long, and I think this equates to the first series. And for these ones were definitely broken into blues and heavy metal. Funk and reggae was one episode, new music was another. This may have even been 3 episodes, possibly. Maybe 2. And there was another episode tacked on the end, which was like a Q&A type episode, where they brought sort of everything together as well. But it was through this and through watching this episode that I became aware of Sly and Robbie. And they were breaking down certain styles and certain ways in which the bass and the drums interacted on specifically reggae records, but you could see its appliance outside of that and to rock generally. And so that was when I became probably first aware of Sly and Robbie. So I dug deeper. So 83, November 83, so a year later. And then sometime in 84, and I was trying to track this through, and I was looking through my vinyl collection, and I realised that I have this version of Anthem. So this would have been around July 84 when I first started listening to Black Uhura, who was the band, if you like, that were associated with very heavily with Sly Dunbar and Robbie Shakespeare, because they were both producers of the band and they played on their records as well. So yeah, it's interesting to just reflect on how one moves between artists and different events, different musical events or different types of musical consumption can lead you on to other areas. So that's all I really want to talk about in this episode, I think. Thanks once again for watching. Bye for now, and I will catch you in the next episode.